for the future of us all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Holly Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Green Party will continue to oppose this bill. Mr. Speaker, the main reason for our opposition for this bill has not changed after discussions at the Select Committee, and that is the very poor, contradictory proposal that's supported by no research or analysis to reduce the repayment holiday from 3 years to 1. So, Mr. Speaker, we've heard in the debate so far about the repayment holiday. It's when borrowers living overseas receive an automatic suspension from their obligations to repay their loans while they are living overseas. And if we want to understand, Mr. Speaker, why we have a 3-year repayment holiday in the first place, who better than the Minister who introduced the repayment holiday in the first place to explain the reasoning for it, Mr. Speaker. And I'm quoting here, as we heard earlier, Peter Dunn from 2007. The new rules will make it easier for people overseas to repay their student loans and will offer the chance of a fresh start for those who have fallen into arrears. There will be a repayment holiday of up to 3 years for borrowers going overseas. During that time, they will not have to make repayments, although their loans will still attract interest. This change recognises the fact that it is not always easy for people to repay their loans while doing their OE or working overseas. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Minister, although he's not here, and the parties who are supporting this bill, including the Labour Party, what has changed since then to make that statement any less true or relevant? And I can tell the House one thing that has changed since the Minister made that statement is that more New Zealanders are moving overseas than ever before. If we want them to ever come back, Mr. Speaker, we should be making our policy settings in such a way that encourages them to do so. So we might fairly ask what impact this bill will have on borrowers' decisions to come back to New Zealand. And we've had advice from the Ministry of Education on this bill. This can be expected to have a negative impact on the margin on the borrower's decision regarding whether to return to New Zealand. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Dunn's arguments about recognising the importance of the OE and offering a fresh start so that people are incentivised to come back to New Zealand after travelling are even stronger in 2012 than they were in 2007. We've seen in the Select Committee report a typical borrower based overseas may face interest obligations after a repayment holiday that amount to 2 to 3 times the original value of the loan. So that is a huge disincentive, Mr. Speaker, for that person to ever pay that loan back or indeed to return to New Zealand. So it's really important to note, Mr. Speaker, that the advice of the government's own officials is that this bill will have a negative impact on people repaying their loans and returning to New Zealand. So I really challenge those on the government benches to explain why on earth we need this change, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's very important to note that the original 3-year repayment provision for a repayment holiday has not been in place for very long. This bill was introduced, the repayment holiday was introduced in 2007, so it's not actually a very long time in which to analyse the evidence of how that repayment holiday has been used and what impact it's had on people's repayments in order to make a considered judgment about whether it should be shortened or not. And the Select Committee heard about this and they quizzed officials about the level of evidence and how much research has been done into the impact of the 3-year repayment holiday. And they said there was not enough empirical evidence to evaluate the effect of the 3-year repayment holiday introduced in 2007, and limited modelling has been done on the likely effect of curtailing the holiday, and borrowers' response to the change is uncertain. And they described, Mr. Speaker, their best estimate as a guess in the Select Committee. So why are we doing this? Why are we shortening the term of the repayment holiday from 3 years to 1, where there's not enough empirical evidence, there's limited modelling, and the best officials can provide is a guess as to how much it might change people's behaviour when it comes to repaying their loans? It seems to me, Mr. Speaker, to be an ideological attempt to rein in the student loan scheme with no credible analysis of the impact and a very real risk that it will in fact influence borrowers to stay away and not return to New Zealand after their OEs and not repay their student loans. So the fact that the government is pursuing this change with no research to back it up and against the advice of officials seems to support what we heard recently from the Prime Minister when he was speaking to an audience of property developers, and they obviously thought he was in a safe space, that he wants to rein in student loans in a big way. Now, we've already seen some examples of the government doing this, like cutting the access to living costs for those over 55, like restricting access to StudyLink from permanent residents. It's begun already, Mr Speaker, and I'm very concerned about what the Prime Minister might be referring to when he says he wants to further rein in student loans in a big way. And it's a shame that Simon Bridges has left the chamber, because he said earlier...
Order.
He said
Order. Just... the member twice has mentioned the absence of members. You cannot mention a minister is not here, which was the first indiscretion earlier on, and I didn't pick you up on that. But you can't refer to the absence of a member from the chamber. Holly Walker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I apologise for that. I did want to point out that Mr Bridges said earlier, National are keeping interest-free student loans because they want to see more students at university and polytechnic. Now, I'm sorry to break it to Mr Bridges, but that is not the reason that National are keeping interest-free student loans. John Key said why when he spoke to the audience of property developers. He said it's because it's about the only thing that will get young people out of bed before 7 o'clock at night to vote, but it's not politically sustainable to put interest back on student loans. So while we've heard from Simon Bridges that it's all about wanting to see more students at university, it is in fact, Mr Speaker, all about not what's best for students, but about what's best for National's votes, and that's what the Prime Minister revealed to the property developers, his real attitude towards students and young people. Mr Speaker, I'm also disappointed to see that the Select Committee decided not to proceed with the fruitful discussion about allowing people who have paid off their loans in full to take a second repayment holiday, which was an interesting idea that came out during the hearings and which I think deserved better consideration. If someone has paid off their loan in full and they later enrol to do a second degree or course and they take out a second student loan, why not reward the behaviour that we want to incentivise, that they've paid off their first loan in full, with the opportunity for a second repayment holiday? As the Select Committee noted in its report, or some of the members of the Select Committee noted, this could be especially helpful for women and for second chance learners, and I think it's a shame that the Select Committee did not see fit to recommend this helpful change, or indeed, as the previous speaker referred to consider it seriously. So, Mr Speaker, the Green Party will continue to oppose this bill. There are, as we've heard from our colleagues, some provisions such as providing a contact person back in New Zealand for overseas borrowers that we think are sensible. But like our colleagues in the Labour Party, there are some parts we can support, but there are also some parts we can't support, and those are enough for us to vote against this bill, Mr Speaker. The repayment holiday, the changes to the repayment holiday are significant. They're not well researched, they're not well analysed, they're not supported by officials, and they will probably result in people taking longer to pay off their loans and staying away from New Zealand. So the Green Party will not support this bill.
I call Paul Goldsmith.